Welcome back to Pick It. We hit 5 wins and 1 loss from our picks in yesterday's video. We had a solid night. However, our late ads and parlays brought us back down to earth as we took a hit with all of them. Hopefully, a few of you managed to capitalize on the pick from yesterday's video. Now let's dive into today's action. For our first game, we have the Cavaliers against the Rockets. Looking into the game total, both teams averaged 227 points between them per game. They have gone over in 70% of their last 5 games, 60% for the season, yet it has only gone over in 40% of the games between the two. For the spread, we prefer the look of the Rockets to cover their line. They beat the Cavs in both season and recent form coverage, however, again they only managed to cover in 40% of matchups against the Cavs. Maybe an alternate line would help this one look appealing. For the Cavs team total, we again prefer them to hit over their line. As you can see, the stats are slightly in favor of this option. It also helps knowing that the Cavaliers average 113.8 points per game. We also prefer the Rockets to hit over their line, as they average 113.2 points per game. Their season hit rate and recent form are looking good, but you would have to consider the lower 40% in matchups. Again, it could be one for an alternate line. For our player pick, we are taking Donovan Mitchell to have over 3.5 made threes. This is an alternate market. He has managed this in 3 of his last 4 games. He also has an 80% cover rate for his matchups and 56% for the season. You could take his regular line of 2.5, but we like the payout with this one, making it worth the risk. Now for the Nets and Pacers game, for the game total, we again slightly prefer the look of them to go over. Both teams average 234 points per game when combined for the season. The cover rates for the matchups and season are better for the over market, yet it does drop off when looking at recent form. For the spread, it's not one we are too keen on. We would suggest using an alternate line if you are going to bet on this market. For me, I would still favor the Nets to cover. Just looking at the stats, you can see why hitting above 80% in matchups and recent form, while they manage a 68% cover rate for the season. Looking at the Nets team total, they average just shy of 112 points per game. They go over their line 86% of the time when playing the Pacers, while they have a 60% hit rate in recent form and 56% for the season. Again, it's at most 1 for the alternate markets. Same goes for the Pacers game total. We also expect them to hit over. They manage an average of 123 points per game, giving them the first spot in rankings. Managing a 71% cover rate in matchups and 60+% for both recent form and this season. Again, I would prefer to strengthen these stats if I were to consider a bet. For our player, we went with Nick Claxton to have over 11.5 points. He has a good-looking cover rate, especially in head-to-heads and matchups. He has hit over in 6 of his last 7 games, 4 and 5 against the Pacers, and 3 in his last 4 away games. It also helps knowing that the Pacers are ranked 29th in points against. Now for the game between the Hornets and Sixers. The game total is looking way more appealing when looking at the over stats, managing to cover in 84% of games this season, 70% in head-to-heads, and 60% for their recent form. When considering the two teams, they manage 223 points per game, making this one look like a good bet for the over total. For the spread, it's one we would most likely give a miss. We are expecting the Sixers to win, but as they are playing a weaker side, anything can happen. It doesn't help that the stats are atrocious for both teams to cover their lines. Moving to the Hornets team total, we definitely prefer them to go over. They manage just shy of 107 points per game. Not only that, but their cover rate for them hitting over is miles ahead of them staying under. Again, we would prefer an alternative line for this one, but it's definitely one to consider. The Sixers game total is a little harder to read. They do average 115 points per game, but with key players missing, and if they take a big enough lead, players may be given a rest. It's one I'm going to give a miss. You may be able to strengthen the stats with different lines, but still, in my eyes, it's not worth the risk. We are going with Brandon Miller to have over 0.5 blocks. He has hit this in 4 of his last 5 games, 3 in his last 4 away games, and in both his matchups against the Sixers. The Sixers are also 27th in blocks against, boosting our confidence a little with this one. Now for the Blazers and Pelicans game, the team total looks much better for the over, especially when going off this season's cover rate. Although they still manage over 60% for both matches and latest form. Both teams combined average just under 224 points per game, showing that this one looks strong, although I still would prefer to look at alternative lines. The spread is favoring the Blazers when comparing the stats. They have covered in 74% of their games this season. For their latest form, it does drop to 60%, and then to 50% for games against the Pelicans. Yet they are still dominating the cover rates for the Pelicans. We will definitely have a look into alternative lines with this one. The same goes for the Blazers team total to go over. They average 107.7 points per game and go over this line in 76% of this season's games, also hitting in 4 of their last 5 games. However, it is even when it comes to games against the Pelicans. We would look to strengthen the hit rate for head-to-head if we were to consider a bet. The Pelicans team total is a lot more even. They manage 116 points per game on average, ranking them in 13th place. It's a high line, as you can see when looking at the stats. It's too even to call in my opinion, so it's one we will stay away from. For our player pick, we are going with DeAndre Ayton to get over 20.5 points and assists. He has managed this in 4 of his last 4 games, also 7 in his 8 games against the Pelicans. He seems to perform against these matchups when going off of the stats. We also like Jonas Valanciunas to have over 7.5 rebounds, even though he let us down the other day. He has hit in 8 of his last 11 games, 100% in games against the Blazers. He has also managed this in 15 of his last 20 home games. His 68% cover rate for the season is one that gives me confidence. Let's dive into the Thunder and Grizzlies matchup. The game total is looking too even for me in terms of average points per game. OKC is ranked 3rd, while the Grizzlies sit in 30th. They have a combined average of 226 points per game. As you can see, the stats for this one are pretty even. The spread is also something we aren't keen on. The stats favor the Grizzlies to cover their line, yet it's not one I would be comfortable taking. Only consider this one on alternative lines, no matter which team you choose. The Thunder's team total is favorable to hit over when going off of stats. They average 120 points per game and manage over this line 70% of this season's games, but they are playing the Grizzlies. If they get a big enough gap, they may rest players, making the game points a lot closer. If you can find a more comfortable line, then maybe it's worth a risk. The same goes for the Grizzlies team total. It's too close to call. The stats favor them to hit over, yet it's only slight. They also only average 105.7 points per game, making it extremely close to the line provided. Our player pick is Jaren Jackson to have over 1.5 made threes. He has managed this in 10 of his last 12 games, 6 in his last 8 home games, and 7 of his 8 games against the Thunder. His recent form and matchups make this one worthwhile. Now, for the Wizards and Bulls game, the game total is another close one. Only in the matchups, it does look like storing for them to stay under, hitting in 71% of their games. Both teams have an average of 126 points per game this season when combined, making this line right on the dot. Looking at the spread, the stats are highly favorable for the Wizards to cover their line, especially when compared to the Bulls' cover rate. Again, we will look to strengthen the stats with alternate lines. The Wizards team total also prefers to hit over, as you can see when comparing the stats in all categories. They are also ranked 16th in points per game, managing 114. Again, I would look to adjust the line for a better cover rate. The Bulls team total is the opposite, preferring to stay under in 70% of the season and games against the Wizards. They average 112 points per game, giving them the 24th position when it comes to rankings. This is another one you could consider tweaking the line for a better cover rate. For the Warriors and Lakers matchup, the game total is slightly in favor of staying under when it comes to the stats. They average just below the line when combining their points per game, as it sits at 235 points. The spread is slightly in favor of the Warriors when comparing the stats. They managed to cover nearly 70% of this season's games, yet the last 5 games and matchups sit around 60%. It's not something we are particularly fond of. The same goes for the Warriors team total. For me, the stats are just too even. As you can see, it's either an even chance or 60 to 40s across the board. They do average 128 points per game, but again it's too close. Maybe an alternate line would be worth a go. We have the same problem with the Lakers game total. It's too close to call. They do manage to stay under 70% of the time when facing the Warriors, yet recent form and season hit rates favor them going over. They average 127 points per game, making this again a close one. For our player, we are going with Andrew Wiggins again. This time for him to have over 17.5 points, rebounds, and assists. He has managed this in 12 of his last 14 games, 100% in his last 6 away games, and a solid 13 out of 14 games against the Lakers. Let's take a look at the game between the Timberwolves and Jazz. We, along with the stats, prefer this game to hit over the total. They average 231 points per game when combined if the teams together. As you can see, they are highly in favor of hitting over in all categories we provide. For the spread, we prefer the look of the Jazz to cover. As you can see, the stats are again dominating the Wolves' stats for season and recent form hit rates. Yet it's even going off games between the two. Maybe alternate lines can help with this one. When it comes to the Wolves team total, because of the matchup's cover rate, we slightly prefer them to go over this line. Although they do only manage 113 points per game. We would have to tweak the line in order to take a bet with this one. While the Jazz to hit over their team total looks much more appealing, with a 70% hit rate in both matchups in this season's games, and 80% for recent form, this one does look strong. They also manage an average of 117 points per game. Our last game is between the Knicks and Kings. For the game total, it's a little too even to call. They manage an average of 230 points per game when combined, making us lean toward the over, yet the cover rates are far from appealing. The spread is looking better for the Knicks to cover, especially when going off matchups, hitting in 75% of the 2 games, while they also manage 60% for recent form and this season. Again, this could be a lot stronger when looking into alternative lines. Looking at the Knicks game total, the stats are all over the place. 100% cover rate in head-to-heads for going over, yet 100% for recent form to stay under. They average 112 points per game, but for me, it's one to stay clear of. We do prefer the look of the Kings to go over their line. As you can see, the stats are looking a lot better, apart from the even chance when it comes to matchups. They average 118 points per game, meaning this could definitely be a good one for the alternate markets. That's it for today, folks. Remember to stay safe and good luck with your bets. Please like and subscribe and see you in the next one.